I was 34 the autumn the long haul found out what I'd been carrying, and I didn't mean to tell them. It came out the way water comes out of a cracked cup, slow for a long time, and then all at once. I worked the counter at the Sundown Diner, out where Highway 20 runs straight and empty through the high desert and the sagebrush turns gray gold for 40 miles in every direction. I'd been there going on 3 years by then, ever since I left my husband Wade and came home with nothing but a duffel bag, my boy Eli, and a borrowed room at my cousin's place. The diner gave me a paycheck and something I needed even more, a place where nobody asked questions if I didn't bring them up first. The writers started coming through that second year. A regional chapter out of Bend called themselves the Long Haul, mostly long-distance men who treated the open road the way some people treat church, something you showed up for, whether or not. They'd roll in 2 or 3 at a time, sometimes a dozen, order their coffee black and whatever pie we had, and leave a tip that made my eyes sting more than once. I never asked why a man covered head to wrist in patches and road dust would tip a waitress $40 on a $6 check. I learned to just say thank you and mean it. I started saving the best slice for them, the one without a dented crust, cut from the center of the pie where the filling sat thickest. It cost me nothing but a little attention. One of them noticed before any of the others did, a big quiet man the others called Crow. He came through every couple of weeks on his run between Bend and the coast, always alone, always polite, and he always set his hat on the empty stool beside him, like he was holding the seat for somebody who wasn't coming. I never asked who. Eli took to Crow before I did. He was 6 that first year, the kind of boy who noticed boots before faces, and Crows were always the same, scuffed, oil-stained, laced twice around the ankle. One evening Eli's bicycle chain slipped off in the gravel lot, and before I'd even come around the counter, Crow was down on one knee in the dust, working it back onto the gear with hands the size of dinner plates, talking low and steady the way you talk to a spooked animal. He never made a thing of it. He just fixed the chain, told Eli to mind the curb on Highway 20, and went back to his coffee like nothing had happened. I watched that and filed it away somewhere I didn't look at too closely. I want to be honest that I wasn't doing any of it to be noticed. After Wade, I had gotten small and careful in ways that take years to undo, and kindness toward strangers passing through was the one part of myself I still trusted to give without flinching. The pie, the coffee, the question about whether the roads had been good, none of it cost me the part I'd learned to keep locked away. What I'd locked away was 8 years of being told where I could go, who I could talk to, and how fast I needed to answer the phone when Wade called. By the time I packed the duffel bag, I'd stopped expecting anybody to believe it had been that bad, since he never once raised a hand to me in front of a witness. I told myself, leaving, that the quiet kind of fear doesn't count as much as the loud kind. I know better now. Then in October, Wade found out where I worked. I never learned how. Maybe he followed Eli's bus one afternoon. Maybe he asked the wrong question of the wrong cousin at the wrong family funeral. What I know is that on a Tuesday I came out to close and saw his truck parked across the highway, lights off, engine idling, the way he used to sit outside our old house, not doing anything, not saying a word, just letting me know he could see me whenever he wanted to. Wednesday he was there again. Thursday too, a little closer to the lot. I told myself I was imagining the worst of it. I told myself a lot of things that week that weren't true. Friday night, Crow came through, just him, just his black and orange bike pulling in under the buzzing sign, just coffee and the last slice of pie, same as always. I poured his cup with a hand that wasn't steady, and some of it splashed over the rim before I caught it. "He's back again," I said, 3 words I hadn't meant to let out loud, not to anybody. He didn't ask who. He just waited, the way certain men wait, like silence was a kindness he was offering me on purpose. So I told him the rest. Not everything, I didn't have words for everything yet, not to a near stranger, but enough. 3 nights now, I said, nodding toward the dark stretch of highway where Wade's truck had idled an hour before Crow ever pulled in. I don't think he's supposed to know where we live. I think he does anyway. Crow didn't ask who he was. He didn't ask what Wade had done to me, or how long it went on, or why I'd finally left. He set down his fork, finished his coffee in one long pull like a man fueling up for a drive, and laid 2 20s on the counter for a $6 slice of pie. "You closing alone tonight?" he asked. "Same as every night," I said. He nodded once, set his hat on his head, and walked out into the dark. I watched his taillight turn east instead of west, the wrong direction for Bend, and told myself it didn't mean anything. It meant everything. I didn't see Crow again that week. What I saw, the next night, was 4 motorcycles sitting in the gravel lot when I came out to lock up, engines off. Riders leaned against their bikes like they'd been there a while and weren't planning to leave soon. I didn't recognize any of them. Nobody introduced himself. One of them just said, "Evening, ma'am," nodded toward my car, and walked me across the lot like it was nothing unusual at all. Nobody mentioned Wade. Nobody mentioned Crow. They just stood there, quiet as a church pew, until I pulled out of the lot, and one of them followed 2 car lengths back all the way to my street before he turned around and rode off the way he'd come. The next night there were 9. I want you to understand something about men like that, because the world teaches you to be afraid of the leather and the patches and the noise of that many engines running at once, and I was afraid, the first night, before I understood. They didn't come to make a scene. They didn't rev their engines outside my house at 2 in the morning to prove a point to anybody. They came quiet, and they stayed quiet, and the only thing that changed from one night to the next was how many of them there were. By the end of that week I learned, though nobody explained it outright, that Crow had called it into his chapter, and his chapter had called every chapter within riding distance, the way you'd call in a debt owed not to one man but to a whole family. Crow hadn't asked anybody for help, not in so many words. He'd said 4 words on a phone line, the diner waitress, trouble, and it moved down through the long hall the way water moves downhill, finding every crack, filling every low place, until there was nowhere left for the thing chasing me to hide. They had a name for it, quietly, among themselves, standing post. They never called it protection. They never called it anything that sounded like a threat to anybody listening. They called it standing post, like soldiers, like men who had done this kind of thing before for somebody's sister, somebody's daughter, a woman none of them had ever met before she started saving them the good slice of pie. One night a rider named Patch, a wiry woman with 20 years on the road and a vest covered in patches from 3 different chapters, caught me staring at the line of bikes and must have read my face. "We're not here to start anything," she said, leaning against her front wheel like she had all night. "We're here so there's nothing left to start." It was the first time anybody had explained it to me in plain words, and it was the only explanation I ever needed after that. I asked Crow once, much later, why. He thought about the question longer than it seemed to need. "You never once asked us for anything," he said. "Not even the tip." We noticed. By the second week of November there were a dozen bikes most nights, sometimes more, rotating through in shifts like men working a job nobody was paying them for. They walked me to my car every closing. They idled at the end of my street until my porch light went dark. On the nights Eli had a school program or a soccer game, 2 or 3 of them would show up in the parking lot, never inside, never making themselves part of something that wasn't theirs to claim, just present, just visible enough that anybody watching from a distance would know exactly what they were looking at. Wade's truck stopped showing up across the highway. For 11 days I let myself believe it was over. It wasn't. On the night before Thanksgiving, with the diner closing 2 hours early and the lot half full of pies nobody had taken home, Wade pulled into the gravel lot itself for the first time in 3 years. He parked his truck crooked, 3 spaces over the line, the way he used to when he wanted you to know he didn't care whose space he was taking. I was alone behind the counter when his boots hit the gravel. I was not alone when he reached for the door. My first thought wasn't for myself. It was for the back booth, where Eli sat over his math homework, his eyelids already losing the fight, a milkshake gone warm beside him, 12 feet and 1 thin pane of glass between him and a man I'd spent 2 years teaching him not to be afraid of by simply never saying his name out loud. I never found out exactly how many men filled that lot by the time his hand touched the handle. Later, the chapter president, a gray-bearded man named Boone, told me it came to 112 riders from 3 states, some of them 4 hours from home on a holiday they should have spent at their own tables. 112 men did not crowd into my diner. They didn't need to. They simply filled the lot, engine to engine, leather to leather, until there was no path from Wade's truck to my door that didn't run straight through them. He stood there a long moment, hand still on the handle, looking at a wall of men who hadn't moved, who weren't shouting, who were simply there, the way a mountain is there. Nobody touched him. Nobody needed to. Boone walked close enough to be heard and said something I couldn't make out through the glass, while somewhere behind him another rider was already on the phone with the county sheriff, reading off a license plate that came back, it turned out, attached to 2 outstanding warrants Wade had been driving around with for over a year. The deputies took him without a single raised voice. The whole thing, 112 engines, a wall of leather that could have flattened a smaller building, the sheriff's lights turning slow red and blue against the dark, lasted maybe 20 minutes start to finish, and not one fist was ever raised. That's the part that has stayed with me longest. They had the size and the number to end it any way they wanted, and they chose only to stand there and be impossible to get past. Even after the deputies' taillights disappeared down Highway 20, a dozen of them stayed parked across that gravel lot until the sky over the ridge went gray, just to be sure the morning came in quiet. Eli slept through the whole thing in the back booth, curled under his coat the way 7-year-olds do when the world gets loud and they've decided to trust the grown-ups around them to handle it. I think about that more than almost anything else from that night, that my son slept safe through the night his mother stopped being afraid, surrounded by 112 strangers who had decided, for reasons that started with a slice of pie, that we were theirs to look after. It's been 4 years now. Wade is 3 states away on a parole he isn't allowed to break in my direction, and I still work the counter at the Sundown Diner, though I own a piece of it now. Boone's chapter put up the money as quiet as they'd done everything else, and never once let me call it charity. Crow still comes through every couple of weeks on his run to the coast. He still sets his hat on the stool beside him. I asked him once, years after that Thanksgiving, who the seat was for. Used to be my sister's, he said. Lost her young. Now I figure it's for whoever needs it. Tonight it's open if you ever want to sit instead of standing a whole shift. I didn't sit down that night. But I think about the offer more than he probably knows, that a man who looked like trouble walking through a door had kept an empty seat warm for 20 years, waiting on somebody worth filling it, and decided, on an ordinary Friday over a $6 slice of pie, that for now, it was me. Eli is 11 now, taller than the booth he used to sleep in, and he still asks, every time the long haul rolls through, whether Crow remembered to bring the dog, a beagle named Wrench who rides in a sidecar and has his own bowl behind my counter. I used to think the bikers saved us that one Thanksgiving and that was the whole of it. I've since learned that for men like that, showing up once was never really the point. The point was always going to be staying.